Hi, everyone. Very pleased to have you joining us for this ALA Solution Series webcast, 5 e-billing metrics your law firm should be tracking. Today's sponsor is Thomson Reuters Elite, and we're proud to have Greg Nilsen with us. He's the product manager at Thomson Reuters. He joined Thomson in July 2015 after a little bit more than a decade of experience working with software as service solutions in development, project management, and product management roles. He also has a background in helping to craft best-in-class customer-centric products with experience in healthcare, supply chain services, tax collection, and of course the billing industries. For those of you who are familiar with Thomson's products and services, you can certainly meet some of the Thomson team at our upcoming regional legal management conferences this fall. Thomson's a big supporter of ALA, both at the chapter and international level as a VIP partner, and we're real pleased to have them here with us today. And with that, I'd like to turn the microphone on over to Greg.
Hey, thank you very much, Sean. I'm very happy to be here today to speak with you all and tell you a little about 5 e-billing metrics your law firm should be tracking. So as Sean mentioned, I'm the product manager here at eBillingHub, and let's get rolling. So if you'd like to reach me, I'll share my email address again at the end of the presentation, but greg.nilsen@tr.com. And Sean kind of outlined for me as well, I have 8 years of product and project management experience in a number of different fields, but before that, I had about 7 years of software development background as well in a few different areas, including healthcare, supply chain services, tax collection billing, and now here I'm working in the legal area. And, you know, it's one of the things that I think that background has given me a lot of ability to see the different areas of legal that, you know, some areas that need tune-up, some areas we need to track better. And so, you know, going forward into this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about what those areas are and, you know, how we can do better and make sure our law firms are performing more efficiently. So to start off, welcome to the world of big data. I'm sure you've heard about big data all over the place. You know, it's a key buzzword within not just the computer industry now, but I think all industries. Everybody's taking a closer look at their data and trying to, you know, understand it. So you have this world of big data, and that's, you know, if you're like me and you appreciate the data, it sounds kind of fun, kind of this amusement park thing. But you know, drilling into it, it's a little bit more difficult to really make sure you're making full use of it. And it's similar as if you went to an amusement park for the first time and, you know, didn't know where anything was, didn't know what the best rides were. Well, you have to figure that out along the way and figure out what you're doing. Now, as you've looked at big data before, you know, what exactly is it when we talk about big data? And, you know, you may have in your head a picture of, you know, just the ones and zeros flowing by, something kind of like the Matrix. It's like this big complex world of data that flows through. Well, the reality is a little bit less glamorous of that. You know, big data is a whole bunch of information that's stored on a whole bunch of servers that are put in a server farm that probably looks like a non-discrete version of the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. It's a big, huge concrete complex. That's not too exciting, but there's a lot of data and a lot of information that is stored in that environment. And the question is not how do you get that data, the question is how do you take advantage of it. So if we step back to our big data world for a moment, we can see that there's a lot of things we can gather from this. And actually in this case, amusement park is a great place to gather data because there's data collection pieces pretty much everywhere you go. You know, whether it's, you know, playing the game, spending your money on concessions, pretty much every ride still has a turnstile to figure out how many people go on that ride. And so we can collect on that information and learn from it. So, for example, we can find out that, hey, the roller coaster we have in the back there, well, it had 58,697 riders last year. Well, that's good, right? Or is that not good? You know, the problem now is we don't have context for that. Is that good? We can continue looking at other numbers we may have gathered. The yellow smaller cursor down here, they've had 23 injuries reported in 2015. 23 sounds like a lot when you're talking about injuries. How many people came to the park? Is that good? Is that bad? We really don't have an idea. And, if we just have information, we kind of continue down that path. We have a ride here, it was out of operation for 32 days last year. Well, why? What's the context of it? And so it's real important when you're looking at big data and looking at data analytics, that having data is nice, but big data really isn't about data. Big data is about insight. Being able to have actionable references, information, comparing that to either, your own information or those of your industry. That's what you want to get out of the information that you're gathering. So back into the world of big data, let's try to quantify some of these. So if I was going to look at, the ride in the back and I found out, oh, well, that ranks 4th for number of riders at the park. Okay, that gives me some context of actually how well this ride performed. But I also combine that with the fact that I knew we spent more on this ride than we did for any other ride in the park. Well, 4th and ranking of 4th is probably something we want to take a look at. Why is that ranked 4th? Are we advertising it well? Is it too hard to get to in the park? Is there problems with that ride? That's information that we can take action on, once we have a better idea of the context in which it's placed. Same thing for the injuries. If we know that's half the national rate, that's a good thing. Okay, well, we're doing something right at this ride. What else can we apply it to other areas? It gives us context for what we're doing. Similarly, if we found out a ride's out of operations, but hey, it doesn't run in the rain, and we had 31 days of rain last year. Well, we only had one day that it was, unable to run in ideal conditions, but maybe we're not using that part of the park most effectively. Maybe there's something else we can do with that park, build another ride that's going to not have time off, that's going to bring in more revenue to our amusement park. So, as we look at big data, again, it's about that insight, about understanding, about something that you can take action on. So big data at the law firm, for legal e-billing, the key areas where law firms are looking for more insight include cash flow inhibitors, what's keeping cash from coming in, what's keeping the payments from coming into our law firm. Process inefficiencies, why are we inefficient, what can we do better, or maybe just identifying what's inefficient in the first place. And client trends, what are your clients doing? What changes are they making? What are their industries doing? What are their practices? Those are things we need to understand to make better decisions as we move forward. So coming into this, I promised 5 different areas we're going to look at. Well, the first one we're going to take a look at is client rejection rates. Client rejection rates are going to be, as I'm sure you're familiar with, the rejection rates of any invoice you're trying to submit to, any one of your clients. And we can essentially measure this with, 2 different vectors. We can measure it in terms of the vendor that your client is using to collect e-bills, which is always a factor when it comes to submitting the bills. Vendors have different practices, some of them more peculiar than others. Some of them are more stringent in particular areas. Some will allow for warnings in areas, and some will straight out reject your submissions. And some have what I refer to as green M&M tests. Their information that has to be provided to kind of prove that you're giving good information, not something that could potentially have problems. Just like an artist at a concert, if they put their list of what they want at the concert and it's a bowl of green M&Ms and there's other colors in there, they know somebody's not following the instructions, somebody's not following along, somebody's not reading the details. And that's why those checks are in place, to make sure that you are following those details and complying with the standards throughout your billing guidelines. But the other vector we can look at too is specific client practices. Sometimes there are client practices beyond just what the vendor has. I think they may, 2 different clients using the same vendor may have 2 different practices when it comes to budget reviews, or they may have different practices when it comes to rejections or write-offs. Some may prefer to reject invoices up front, and some may prefer to receive those invoices and then later write off certain portions or write down certain portions. So we can measure it in these two different areas. But when we look at rejection rates, we can, even if we combine those two, we can see that rejection rates vary across the board. This is looking at all the invoices that have been submitted to eBillingHub within 2015, and they range anywhere from a 30% rejection rate down to, and I even cut this off on the far end, but down to less than a percent. And so that's a fairly diverse range. But if we want to take a step further and see how that's impacting our law firms, if my law firm has an average invoice that is $10,000 and say we're sending out 400 invoices a month, well, at the far end of that scale, that's putting $1.2 million in the lurch during the year. That's a lot of money. Sorry, that's not even during the year. That's every month that's putting that much money in the lurch. So we need to make sure we look at the ways to address that. Whereas the other end of the spectrum, even at a 1% rejection rate, that's only talking 40 grand. So that is almost more than $1.1 million in money flowing through our law firms at the two different ends of that scale. Now, on average, a rejection causes delay within your law firm as well, delaying them in time to collect your money. And we see, on average, that a rejection causes about a 9-day delay. That's a factor of many different things, but a lot of it that, when a reject comes through, there are times that a biller can address it and fix it, but there's a lot of other times that it needs to go back, be reviewed by a lawyer, be reviewed potentially by a partner as well before it gets resubmitted, or it may need to be resubmitted multiple times. But so we see an average of 9 days, which leads to more than 2 million days of total cash flow delay that we saw amongst our clients last year. That's a little more than a substantial number. That's a large delay in cash flow. And even if we just look at the 9 days at a time, let's go back to our chart here. If we're assuming we place our collected payments in an average savings account, and when I say average, I mean we get less than 1% back on them, that's an additional $59 a month, or on the far end, almost another $2,000 a month that is money that's going uncollected by the law firm. While that seems much smaller than the 1.2 million, that's still more than 20 grand a year on the rejection cases here on the left, and that's hitting the bottom line. So we really do need to watch these rejection rates as we go forward. And besides the money aspect of it, clients are also beginning to monitor these metrics as well, and some of them have been for a little bit now. And high rejection rates can reflect poorly on your firm's performance. So if you're depending on the vendor so that your client is using to check all your billing guidelines for you, and you're submitting that multiple times, their clients are beginning to look at that and say it's reflecting poorly on you because you should be able to get it in correctly the first time, and then it reflects poorly on the firm in general that maybe they're not up to speed with what that client needs. So some of them are being more critical in this area as well, which is an area of concern. We want to make sure that more of those bills get in correctly, not just to get money flowing in, but to make sure that the firm's reputation is held high as well. So, I'm going to wrap up each of these sections with a recommendation, but know your rejection rates is the simple recommendation here, because they impact your cash flow, your billing and collection costs, and your business relationships. So the better handle you have on all those pieces, the better off you're going to be. Second area we're going to talk about is the rejection and write-off sources. Now, when we look at the e-billing workflow, there's really 6 points in the invoicing process where rejections or potential rejections can be identified. They can be done upfront at time entry. They can be done in an invoice review, which is essentially when the invoice is sent from the timekeeper to the billing department. It can be checked during the submission process, where it's actually going from the billing department into the vendor service. It can be checked, actually at the point of rejection. If it's rejected upon submission, that's step 4. And then there's always potential for post-acceptance rejections, especially when it comes to budgets or other areas that may be reviewed and cut down or rejected because they don't comply to other billing guidelines that aren't automatically checked out by the vendor. That is always a possibility. And lastly, the appeal process. Again, once you get into that appeal process, someone's been paid and you find out you're short paid, and then you have to go back and justify what's been done. Going to the appeal process is a 6th place that we can identify those rejections. Ideally, we do it before then, but sometimes it comes later. And when I say ideally, we catch them earlier than not. Our correction costs increase substantially over time. From the time entry piece, where errors can be fixed in a matter of minutes by one person, to the far right, where an appeal may take hours of several people's time to put together justifications, to research, why it was short paid, where the problems came in. It's a substantial trade-off there. And there's a number of really good quick reasons and things that we can check to make sure that, we don't ever get to that point of an appeal. Here's a list of the top 9 words, phrases, or characters that we see that trigger rejection. A lot of them are things that can be checked up front, and while you can try to train your timekeepers to make sure that they are not using some of these terms, it's going to be a lot easier if we can check them either while they're entering their time or even in the submission process to make sure that we're not sending out any invoices that have these, because we know they're going to cause problems in the workflow. So with this, the recommendation here is to know your rejection sources and move your billing guideline checks upstream. As an example, over on the left here, we have a donut chart of where we see most of our rejections occur. And with eBillingHub, we see most of them actually happen when they've been submitted and then get rejected downstream. We do a whole bunch of checks within eBillingHub to make sure that they don't go out with any issues, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to get rejected for other reasons. So most of them do fall in the invoice rejection piece, but again, if we look at our chart of how much effort it's going to take to deal with those corrections, the further to the left we can push those, the more savings that a law firm is going to have. So if we can push things at time entry as much as possible, the law firm is going to save a whole lot more money. Number 3 is clerical rejections and reasons, or clerical rejection reasons, apologies. So what's a clerical rejection? Well, in the context of e-billing, a clerical rejection is really any rejection that occurs because client data is not properly maintained at the vendor source. Some of these are pretty straightforward, but things like timekeepers not being updated. Maybe you added a new timekeeper to a matter and you didn't update it in the vendor system. Budget being ignored, that you may have billed more than the budget allowed for, or the budget wasn't updated, so everything's getting rejected because it goes over that budget. Matters being out to date, the information related to them not being the most current relevant information, or even logins expired. The login that your firm has set up for a vendor is no longer valid. And so now you have to go ahead and get that password reset, or you have to make sure that the right contact has the right access to the right piece so you can submit that. Now, those seem pretty straightforward in general, and we'll see within 2015 of all the invoices that we're seeing through eBillingHub, we actually only saw about 3.9% of those fall into the bucket of clerical rejection. This seems pretty good, but clerical rejection reasons, that they are pretty consistent across the board. They're showing you the last 4 years information there, And, consistently the maintaining of timekeepers and the login rejections that are the biggest issue that, we see. But, didn't I just say that it's a relatively small piece? We're talking less than 4%, 1 out of 25 invoices that gets rejected for one of these reasons. Well, yeah, but if we're looking at an entire base, in which we did last year, $36.6 billion that were billed just through eBillingHub, that's $1.43 billion that is being slowed down in the payment process just because these things weren't checked. And just for logins alone, it's almost $500 million that were held up. That's a little bit more substantial of a value. That's where we move from percentages into actual insights there. When we see the impact it has at our firms, we can then take better action. Hey, let's make sure we're proactive, making sure these logins work before we submit them, before we have any other issues, before we have any other problems, to make sure we don't have that impact on our law firm. So the recommendation here is that we keep a close eye on the clerical rejections. Clerical rejections are preventable. They're really not, they're not anything crazy. They're not high standards. They're just information that needs to be conveyed as part of the invoice. So monitor your clerical rejection causes closely. If you're having a lot of problems with logins or errors, make sure you put in a process to deal with that. Let's have on the second point here, establish those processes, to prevent those issues. Make sure that, before an invoice goes out, that you're going to check to make sure that all the timekeepers are in order so that you don't have to deal with that rejection, so you don't end up with a potential, as we said earlier, than 9 days of potential delay. Let's get that fit up front and get that addressed and make sure that the billing process works as smoothly as possible, because that's going to benefit us further down the line. So that brings us to metric number 4, billing overhead. So the first 3 of these that I think were fairly straightforward. In different areas we can focus on, we can see a little bit more directly. The last 2 we're going to talk about are a little less direct here. So the reason I kind of saved them for the last 2. So what is billing overhead? Well, essentially the overhead is any billing activities that don't contribute to the bottom line. So we know that within billing we have to have people in place to get the bills out, and there's going to be a certain number of people anyway that are involved in that process, but we really don't want to make that any more of an effort than it has to be either. So if we're going to define billing overhead, I'm going to kind of display it here in terms of equations to give an idea of what we're looking at. So the ideal billing output is basically going to be all the invoices that we could potentially bring in divided by the number of workers, the minimum number of workers that we need to process those. And that'll give us, our ideal output. That's the money we're actually going to be collecting in the process. That's what we want to aim for. But we also know, looking at the data we've seen, especially over the last 5 years, firms are dealing with more and more clients, and that's across the board. It's not just the large firms that are dealing with more. It's not just the small ones. It's everybody. From on the left end there, 2011, large firms were dealing with over 1,500 different corporate clients. Our smaller ones were dealing with less than 500. But now the smaller firms that are, in our world, smaller, meaning they're sending out less than 500 invoices a month, they are sending those invoices to closing in on 2,000 different corporate clients. And as we've gotten into 2016, that number's gotten very close to that. And our larger clients are sending out more than 1,000 bills a month. They're closing on 3,500 different corporate clients that they're dealing with. So because we're dealing with more corporate clients, more billing guidelines, more vendor services in that process as well, as they emerge to meet the needs of all the different corporate clients that are out there, there's additional overhead just for switching and tracking and keeping or understanding where all that data is on your client side. Because these clients are using one of more than 100 different spend and matter management systems that are available on the corporate marketplace. And so not only are they submitting the invoices to each one of those, but then they're going back and checking every one of them for status updates. They have to get that information. They have to get that process updated. And if you have somebody checking all the status updates that even if it's 20 or 30 of those different services, that's enough to produce pretty substantial overhead for them. So going back to some of our equations, let's kind of define our billing overhead. So we had defined earlier, the maximum output that we could generate over here on the left. But we know we're not going to be able to bill at that actual capacity. We know that there's time that's going to be spent on non-billing or rebilling activities by our staff or billing staff. So that's going to make them less efficient, and so that's going to take some of the money out of the collection process, just because they have to do the other tasks and get the bills, but still try to get the bills out on time. But if you have to have a larger, you may have to bring on more people for your staff, and bring in additional resources to make sure that your bills get out on time. Well, that's another complication to it. Or you may have to bring in one or more billing managers to make sure that, or e-billing managers that have to, coordinate that team, make sure everything gets out as it needs to, help establish those processes within the group. However, whatever resources you're adding to the group is going to be taking away from your bottom line, and you end up with this lost gross margin in the process. And, obviously that's something you want to avoid. You want to avoid losing that money, but, we have to have that balance. And there's usually this, mentions that, but there's a trade-off, in the process. When it comes to billing overhead, the recommendation basically is to know your overhead and its causes. One, overhead can be tracked at individual, team, vendor, or client levels. I kind of spelled that out because, your overhead may not be the same for everybody involved. You may have, depending on how your organization is set up, if you have a specific individual that's tied to a specific vendor or to a specific client, obviously they're going to be, connected, and you may want to track that at those levels. But you may be able to track them at your team. But understanding, what your vendor impact is if there's, say there's twice as much overhead with one vendor as there is with another one, you need to be aware of that and be able to address it properly. Or if you have one client that causes more than another, you need to understand that and be on top of it. So, track it at those different levels so that you can understand the causes, because it's unlikely to be one number that can give you the full picture of what's going on at your firm. And two is understand that overhead is often a trade-off for realization rates. So, obviously we want to have our realization rates as high as possible, but, we want to bring in as much money. We want to make sure that we're getting as many of our bills paid on time as possible. But, to be able to do that, we often need to have additional overhead to make sure that we're performing at the levels we need to. Otherwise, things are likely to slip through the cracks. So, if you have to understand, or you have to decide as a law firm which is the most important for you. Is it going to be making sure we realize as much as possible, or is it trying to keep our overhead down? Those are conflicting interests, and your firm has to decide which is most important to it. And knowing your overhead can help you plan for future needs. So if you're bringing on new clients and you understand, say you have 3 new clients that are coming on, in the next few months, and that they all have on average X overhead, that allows you a better plan for your billing department to know if you need more people or not to be able to support that new business that's being taken on proactively instead of having it come after the fact. So, to be able to plan your need more effectively, that overhead can really help you and keep you from, having to play catch up later down the line, or have to push people through overtime to make sure that your bills get out when they need to get done. I saw a few chat items that, are we still okay with audio?
I'm hearing you fine.
Yes, audio is fine, Greg. I'm responding to people as they ask questions. So please chat any technical questions to hosts instead of all participants.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption. I just want to make sure I saw a couple of them pop up. So.
No worries. Thanks
make sure I'm not talking to myself. All right. So that's the first 4. We got one more for you here, and that is the client industry trends. I kind of alluded to this earlier, that this is an area that firms had to keep track of to be able to make sure that, they were really getting the full picture, because we've talked about all these metrics that are basically central to the law firm itself so far, but we haven't talked about some of the bigger picture here, what's outside. So we're kind of looking at the picture when we in big data world. We're looking at the picture of, hey, it's the 4th most popular ride. Well, what do we do since we invested the most into that ride? How do we improve it? How do we make it better with what we have? But when we're looking at industry trends, we're looking more at like the second scenario I was talking about there within big data world. That scenario where we are, we're comparing it to an outside rate. So, we saw there that the injury rate was half the norm. Well, we're not going to get that by comparing our own rides. We're only going to get that by comparing to larger averages. So that's why we need to keep an eye on things like client industry trends. And monitoring these client industry trends can really help you answer a number of different questions. Things ranging from, should a new business opportunity be pursued? Or if you have multiple opportunities, which one do you pursue? In the case where you may have, 2 different opportunities that both are roughly, say, worth about $2 million to your firm. Well, if one has a rejection rate, it's using a vendor that has a rejection rate with your firm of 30% versus another one that has a rejection rate of 5%, you may want to be leaning more towards the one that's going to be a 5 just because of all the money that's not going to be in limbo in that process, that's not going to be delayed in the process. Obviously that's not the deciding factor in taking on the new business, but it's something that needs to be considered. Other things that the law firm should be looking at is, are you billing rates that are appropriate? Help you understand, your business position. So if you're billing at, say, rate X within the electronics industry, like retail electronics industry, and if that the average rate is $25 an hour higher than your billing, well, maybe your rates aren't where they should be. Maybe you should try to negotiate with them. Or if you know they're higher than the industry norm, then okay, maybe we're seeing, or we're putting ourselves at risk of losing business because our billing rates aren't where they should be. And that's information that's good to know, especially not just from one opportunity to the next or one matter to the next, but just in the regular dialogue with a client. And lastly, how is my bottom line affected? We talked about rejection rates and write-off rates, and even the clerical reasons. But those are all going to affect your bottom line. But if you know that there's trends within the industry, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, but industry trends that may impact just the opportunities that are available to your law firm. So as we're talking about industry trends, it is an admittedly broad topic. So I'm not going to give you a single metric here for client industry trends because it's not possible. There's so many different areas that we can look at that impact different practice areas in different businesses differently. But some things that are important that impact most areas are things like outside legal spend growth. It's good to know, are your clients generally trending towards having more or less of their outside legal spend? You know, are they investing outside, or are they trying to bring things in-house? And is that for an industry, or is that for just a particular business? Because if you know the automotive, everybody's bringing things in-house. Okay, well maybe you know, we do something a little bit differently to make sure we retain some of the clients, or you know, brush up on that relationship to make sure it's as strong as it can be. Things like approved timekeeper rates. You know, are we billing at the appropriate rates? Are they within, you know, the acceptable ranges within the industry, or are we, you know, pricing ourselves out of our market? What are the rejection rates in the various industries? So if we're entering a new industry or a new practice area, you know, or even, you know, considering, you know, bringing on a new resource that may address that area, you know, what are the rejection rates? What are the complications that come with it? And if there's some, especially like, you know, patent and IP work, tends to have very low rejection rates, and so, you know, you'll be looking at a smaller range or different, more narrow range for what's acceptable in the industry, whereas compared to, you know, litigation cases, which may have more varying rejection rates because the work varies more. Similarly, the write-off rates, you know, how do they behave? And then another thing that's key to look at is the average days to pay. We talked about, you know, the delays and the days to pay, but if you know an industry or even just a potential client, if they are more likely to, say, pay within 90 days, or some are more likely to hold on to that until they absolutely have to pay, or some of them will pay you right away, it's good to know what those averages are so you can plan your business and your needs and your operations accordingly. So the recommendation here is simply don't be surprised. You know your clients and their industries inside and out so you can make the best decision for your firm and get as much data as you can about them. You know, that'll allow you to resource your accounts with e-billing staff appropriately, allow you to allocate time for rejections and appeals, because if you know 30% of them are going to come back, you're going to have to spend time getting them out so you can get paid. And set your cash flow expectations. As I mentioned, the days to pay, you know, knowing that if your average is going to be 30 days with one type of client and it's going to be 90 days with another, well, that's a big difference when it comes to the cash flow. So understand that, so you're not surprised, but you're actually, you know, understanding and happy when trends change, or when you see the effects of these trends. So to kind of wrap up for a conclusion here, put metrics to work for you. That's the crux of all this. You know, I can recommend specific areas, but every law firm, every area is a little bit different. So when we're talking about putting metrics to work for you, you know, you may see, you know, I definitely see this on the business and finance side of things, that, you know, it's like this one metric will tell you how well your business is doing, and it may help, but one metric that does not fit every business, does not fit every operation. So make sure you put your metrics to work for you. Identify your firm's greatest concern. You know, if your biggest concern is, hey, are we being efficient with our process? Are there things we can do better? You know, that's where you want to gear your metrics, your data gathering. If that's not a concern and you're more concerned with the industry trends, well, that's where you want to focus your efforts, not necessarily on in-house data gathering, but on external resource gathering, you know, external metric gathering. You know, but identify your firm's greatest concerns, and that's the best place to start. Secondly, quantify it with meaningful metrics. You know, as I showed you earlier in big data world, you know, we can get metrics, we can get lots of information, but make sure we put it in the context of something that is meaningful. So if you're looking, you know, for the rejection rate, you know, the rejection rate at a vendor may provide you some of the information, and you may be able to provide, say, you know, recommendations to oncoming clients if they ask you for what vendor to use, but you know, really you have little control over that, but you can look at, you know, your operations staff and know if you have one biller that does better with that vendor than another, you want to make sure that they go on that business and that they're, you know, they're not being asked to do something they're not as good at. You know, you want to optimize your resources as much as possible. So, you know, quantify it with what's meaningful to what you're trying to identify. And thirdly, regularly monitor these metrics. When it comes to metrics and analytics and data gathering, it's not a one-time process. It is something that really needs to be ongoing, and you want to monitor those metrics, take corrective actions, and then if your firm's needs change, re-identify, reevaluate, and pick new metrics to start monitoring. But use them to take corrective actions and make sure that you are being as efficient as possible with your law firm. Get your bills out the door, get them to where they need to be, and get money collected as effectively as possible. And whatever measures it takes to help you do that, that's where you want to focus on. So I gave you a few places here to start, things to take into consideration for what you might want to be measuring, but ultimately it really depends on your firm's needs. I could probably list 100 different metrics that different law firms are tracking to try to make sure they're as efficient as possible. But if I was going to boil it down, these 5 are probably the 5 key areas we want to look at. But again, it really depends on what your law firm is looking to accomplish. So with that, I want to say thank you. Again, there's my email address, greg.nilsen@tr.com. I am open to taking any questions now if anybody has them.
Yes, thanks, Greg. We do have a few that are coming in now, and just wanted to quickly share with everyone that a copy of Greg's presentation will be made available to each of you who have registered for today's webcast and will be sent electronically. It will also live evergreen on the ALA Legal Marketplace under our webcast tab. So you'll be able to find today's presentations in 2 spots and watch it via video, actually. So first question, mainly just, I think you did a great job setting the tone with the amusement park analogy, just in terms of all the things that you could be looking at and measuring. One group wanted to know, where exactly are you getting, like where are you getting your metrics and all the detail that you're sharing with us today? Is that from your own particular user base, or?
Yeah, what we shared here is our general information from our user base here at eBillingHub. We currently have about 400 different clients that deal with more than 3,500 different corporate clients and pretty much all the 100+ different vendor services. So that comes from that realm. But put in perspective, we processed about 3.2 million invoices through eBillingHub last year, and as I mentioned in the earlier slide, that was about $36.6 billion worth of billings.
That's a pretty good sample size. Hey, we've had a couple folks come back, and they noticed in the presentation, this was earlier on, you had some specific phrases that triggered rejections. I think it was part of the rejection rules. And yep. Wondering if you could just really quickly, maybe even scoot on back to that particular slide. There you go, so folks could take a peek at those.
Yep. So if you want to jot them down real quick, or if you'd like to get a copy of the presentation, as Sean said, we made available after this. Those will all be in there. We also put those out in a couple of different of our white papers that we have, so we can get them to you one way or another.
Excellent. In terms of identifying some of the metrics you need to be looking at in the data, if you haven't started with this process, it seems a lot to get your arms around. Where is a good place for folks to start? Is it just simply taking some of the metrics that you've identified here and applying them to their own firm, or do you have a strategic direction that you guys help folks with when they're just getting started with this process and sort of getting their arms around the big data?
Yeah, that's a real good question. And there's a number of different ways you can go about it. It is possible to gather some of the information just in your time billing systems and to start getting a view. With eBillingHub, we put together a number of reports, and that's something we're working on expanding into more detailed dashboards with more detailed analytics that we're putting together as we're continuing to expand and grow our service. So we're trying to give firms more insight. I think that was something up until a couple years ago that wasn't necessarily an identified need. I think some firms that come have realized that it was needed, but it wasn't a demand across the board, and our focus was mainly on getting invoices from point A to point B. But now we're taking a more detailed look to make sure that we're giving law firms all the information we can to help them operate their businesses more efficiently.
And when you're doing that, Greg, like one thing that sort of came up was, a pretty big priority for our members with ALA and the firms they work with is obviously keeping an eye on firm profitability. Once you've identified some areas of weakness, do you have strategies in place to help folks get back on track, or maybe address, for instance, if their rejection rules haven't been something that they've taken a hard look at, or the rejection rate? Do you guys help them with just a course of action, or what do you recommend there once they've identified something that needs a little support?
From there, we can either offer solutions that we have, or recommend. We do have some partners that can help with some of those pieces as well. For example, we do work with a number of mobile timekeeping applications that use our billing guideline service to make sure that the billing guidelines are being met, and so they tie that in with their mobile time entry piece, so that the validation rules are actually checked as it's entered. And so we could recommend some of those partners that we have that may fit the bill to help push that upstream and make things more efficient. But if it's not that area, there are different partners we work with as well to get data, get more reports out, and get a little bit more detailed look at the data.
Okay.
So we can help provide a lot of different solutions. As I kind of was mentioning at the end there, it really depends on what the law firm's looking to accomplish with the data they're being given.
Very good. This next question, it may fall into sort of the industry trends bucket, and I know that you work with a variety of size law firms, different focus, different areas of practice, but what do you suggest to determine if billing rates are appropriate for the clients you're working with?
So with that, we do have a number of that data that comes through our system. So it's something that we can kind of dive into. It's something that we're working on making available to our customers right now. But it's something that we can dive into and get some of those, in whether it's by industry or by practice area. It's all a lot of data that comes in to generate the files that we do, because a lot of our focus on pulling data out of time billing systems and generating the different leads or compliant files. And so we can analyze some of that data that's coming in to identify if billing rates are appropriate, if they match industry standards, or we can even do that just based off the billing guidelines and figure out exactly one corporate client to the next, what they're looking at. So there's different ways we can analyze that, but we're working on better presenting that in a way that is more comprehensive, sanitized data, because obviously we don't want to put anybody's data at risk either. So we want to try to analyze those trends without, having anything be personally identifiable to a user, a timekeeper, or a law firm. So, we're trying to make sure all that is squared away before we we actually have the offering out there, but it is coming down the line.
Okay. Just taking one last scan of these questions, Greg. I think that's everything for today on our Q&A. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. And Greg, I'll leave it with you for any last words. And I know, there you go. You have your slide at the end there.
Yeah, so just thank you very much. And thank you, Sean, the ALA, for the opportunity to speak with you here today. I hope it's been useful and insightful for you. But if you have any other questions, any other, anything you'd like to ask or learn more about, or just learn what we're trying to do with eBilling to make it more efficient here, please feel free to reach out to me there at greg.nilsen@tr.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Thanks, Greg.